In Holland, almost 400 years ago, a single flower bulb could cost more than a large house on the best street in Amsterdam. People handed over their homes, their land, even their life savings for one tulip. So, what was really going on? On a cold morning in Amsterdam, a man dips his pen and signs away the deed to his house. In return, he receives one tulip bulb, about the size of an onion. He will never even watch it bloom. This was not a foolish man making a strange mistake. A single bulb could be worth more than a fine canal house, around 10,000 guilders. People traded homes, land, and a lifetime of savings for these little brown bulbs. Pull back, and you see the city around him. In the 1600s, Amsterdam was one of the richest places on earth. This was the Dutch Golden Age, when much of the world's trade flowed through this one busy harbor. Along the docks stood warehouses packed to the roof with spices, silver, and silk. Ships came in heavy with goods from across the seas and left again loaded with profit. Money was everywhere, and it was new money. That wealth created something the world had rarely seen, a large middle class. Merchants, craftsmen, and brewers now had spare money in their pockets, and they wanted to spend it. But money alone did not feel like enough. They wanted objects that announced who they had become, things that told the neighbors, "Look how far I have climbed." They were hunting for a symbol of success. Then came the flower. The tulip had been carried west from the gardens of the Ottoman Empire, and Europe had never seen anything like it. A bloom so vivid and strange it looked almost painted by hand. And here is the riddle. A tulip is only a flower. It pays no rent, earns no wage, and within a week it wilts and dies. So why would anyone trade a house for one? The answer arrives on a single morning in February. But not just any tulip set hearts racing. The plain, solid-colored blooms were pleasant enough. What people truly craved were the broken tulips' flowers streaked with sharp lines of color, like flames frozen on the petals, and no two ever exactly alike. Each broken tulip was its own small miracle. A buyer could believe he owned the only one of its kind in the whole world. That feeling of holding something unique is exactly what drove the price into the clouds. But here is the twist hiding inside those beautiful petals. The flames everyone paid fortunes for were not a gift of nature's design. They were a symptom of sickness. A virus was painting those stripes, and not a single person alive at the time knew it, and the cruelty of it ran deeper. The very infection that made the flower so stunning also made the plant weak. Infected bulbs grew slowly, behaved unpredictably, and were hard to multiply into new flowers. So the supply stayed tiny while the hunger kept climbing. The most desirable flowers were also the rarest, because the thing that made them gorgeous was the same thing that kept them scarce. Beauty and shortage were locked together, and among all the broken tulips, one stood above the rest, whispered about like a legend. They called it Semper Augustus, pure white, slashed through with streaks of deep blood red. Only a handful were believed to exist anywhere on earth. How badly did people want it? As early as 1623, 10 Semper Augustus bulbs were offered for 1,2,000 guilders. To understand that number, you have to know what guilders could buy in the streets of Amsterdam. A fine canal house cost around 10,000 guilders. A skilled worker earned maybe 150 to 300 guilders in a whole year. So those 10 bulbs were worth decades of a man's labor for flowers that would wilt and die within a week. Something strange started happening in the flower markets. A new kind of buyer appeared. These people did not own gardens. They did not care about petals or color. They wanted only one thing: to buy a bulb cheap and sell it again for more. And the prices climbed in ways that made people gasp. One bulb sold for 46 guilders. Within a single month, that same kind of bulb was selling for 515, more than 11 times the price, in 30 days. It was not a one-time fluke. Another bulb went from 95 guilders to 900 inches just as short a time. People watched the numbers and could not quite believe what their own eyes were telling them. The price was alive, and it was running. And here is the only reasoning anyone seemed to need. The price was going up, so it would keep going up. The fact that bulbs were getting more expensive became the reason to buy them. The rise itself was the promise. Nobody asked what a flower was truly worth anymore. They asked only one question: will someone pay me more tomorrow than I paid today? And as long as the answer felt like yes, the buying did not stop. It only grew louder. The trade left the gardens entirely. It moved into the back rooms of taverns, thick with smoke and the smell of beer. Men shook hands across wooden tables, agreed on prices, and drank to the deal. But there was a strange detail at the heart of all this. During the trading season, the bulbs were asleep in the cold ground, deep underground all winter. No one could even see them. So the buyers and sellers were not trading flowers at all. They were trading paper. And then, in the autumn of 1636, the trade took one last dangerous step. The bulbs stopped changing hands altogether. People began buying and selling contracts, promises to deliver bulbs that did not yet exist, for a price agreed in advance. The idea was borrowed from the grain markets, where farmers sold their harvest months before it was cut. And here was the part that lit the fuse. Money was cheap to borrow, and most of these contracts asked for almost nothing up front. You could promise to pay a fortune you did not actually have, and simply hope to sell the promise before the bill came due. So the doors swung wide open. Weavers left their looms, bakers left their ovens, shopkeepers closed early. Ordinary craftsmen with calloused hands now traded flowers they would never plant, certain that riches were only a signature away. The same bulb might be sold 5 times in a single day, never once lifted from the cold ground. Nobody touched soil. They only passed papers from hand to hand, a frenzy later mocked as the wind trade, because they were trading in the wind. Then came the moment that still feels strange to read about. In the town of Alkmaar, the estate of a dead speculator named Wouter Bartelmeus went up for auction, the money meant for his orphaned children. Buyers packed the room and emptied their purses for bulbs that lay buried in the frozen ground, invisible, unbloomed. The Alkmaar auction raised staggering sums for nothing anyone could see or hold. At the very top, everyone believed the climb was permanent. Prices had only ever gone up, so surely they always would. The belief felt as solid as the brick houses lining the canals. But the whole tower rested on one fragile thing. Every promise was only worth something if the next person said yes. The entire fortune of Holland now balanced on a single quiet word. And what happens when, one cold morning, somebody finally says no? It was the morning of the 5th of February, 1637, in the Dutch town of Haarlem. Inside a warm tavern, sellers laid out their bulbs at the same sky-high prices as always. They expected the usual scramble of eager hands and shouted offers. The auctioneer cleared his throat and called for the first bid. He waited, and then something happened that no one in that room had ever seen. Silence. Not one buyer raised a hand. He called again, lower this time. Still nothing. And in that quiet, a cold thought spread through the room like a draft under the door. If no one would pay, then the bulbs had never truly been worth a fortune at all. Word raced out of Haarlem faster than any messenger. Within hours, the same chill reached one town, then the next. Across Holland, everyone who held a bulb tried to sell it at the very same moment. And there it was, the answer to the riddle, arriving in a single evening. With everyone selling and no one buying, prices in these markets fell by roughly 95%. A bulb that had been worth a fine house in the morning was worth almost nothing by night. The flames in the petals had not changed. Only the one quiet word that held them up had finally turned from yes to no. Now came the wreckage. Buyers who had promised enormous sums on paper simply refused to pay. They had bet their futures on bulbs still sleeping in the ground, and now they wanted no part of them. The fights spilled out of the taverns and into the local courts. But the judges had no idea how to rule. How do you force a man to pay a fortune for a flower that was never really worth one? No one had an answer. Here is the part people get wrong. After the crash, you might expect Holland to fall to its knees, bankruptcies everywhere, families ruined from coast to coast. But modern historians say the wider economy did not collapse at all. The truth is that only a relatively small circle had been deeply exposed. Many of the wildest deals were paper promises that were quietly settled for pennies or simply never paid. By 1638, prices had leveled off, and the city went back to business. So what was the bubble actually made of? Not value. The tulip never earned a single coin. It paid no rent, did no work, and died. The price came almost entirely from one thing: people watching others buy. Strip it down, and the engine was simple: the fear of being left out. Each buyer saw a neighbor get rich and could not bear to be the one who missed it. That dread, multiplied across a whole country, was the fortune. And here is why this story still matters. A new and exciting thing appears. A good story grows around it. Prices rise, which pulls in more buyers, which lifts prices again. Easy borrowing pours fuel on the fire. Then, in one moment, confidence breaks. It happened with railway shares, with internet stocks, with housing, with crypto coins. Different objects, different centuries, but the shape of the curve was almost identical every time. So here is the quiet lesson the tulip knew all along. When the main reason to buy a thing is that its price keeps rising, you are not really buying the thing. You are buying the hope that someone will pay you more for it. And one cold morning, that someone simply stops coming. Return to that man from the cold morning, the one who signed away his house for a bulb the size of an onion. Picture him days later, standing in the same gray light, holding the very same bulb in his open palm. Nothing about it has changed, but now it is worth almost nothing. And weeks later, far away in a garden in Haarlem, a single tulip finally pushes up through the spring soil. Its petals open, streaked with red flames against white, exactly as beautiful as the legend promised. The flower never knew about the auctions, the promises, or the panic. It simply bloomed, sick and lovely, and entirely indifferent to all of it. That is the whole strange truth of the tulip, the thing that makes it more than an old story. The flower wilted in a week, just as everyone knew it would. The fortune wilted in a single evening. The strangest part is what the bubble was built on: belief alone. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe. There is always another one worth telling.